I think that the shadow AI or AI used by employees is a fact. It's, I don't care who you are. If you say that I don't want ChatGPT in my enterprise, you're going to have ChatGPT in your enterprise. There is a universe of things living inside the browser. And when I see that as a security person, I think, what's going on in that universe? I want to observe what the story is. And it may mean enterprise browser. It may mean application use. It may mean some local activities. And of course, there's classic consumer use. So at least for the enterprise browser use, I certainly see the need of something that gives me deeper visibility about what happens inside my browser. The legacy process, legacy tech, and enterprise complexity form a very nasty mud ball or a nasty combination that is really hard to solve from the outside. You may build a really good tech that helps in a SOC using AI, or detects threats in X or fixes Y, and you show up and you realize it's a company that existed for 300 years and their IT was started in 1957 and they still have Windows 2003 deployed. And you're like, holy cow, how I'm gonna actually make my tech fit? Underestimating this is the main challenge. If you wanna sell only to the absolute cutting edge 2-year-old startups in Bay Area, go right ahead. You would not have to deal with legacy tech and probably legacy process. But most of the world isn't like that.
Hi, Anton. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast.
Perfect. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I just want to give a brief background to our listeners about you, what you do. So I think you're quite famous in the industry for inventing the term EDR at Gartner, and that shaped a big space in security. And you've been at the forefront of cybersecurity evolution for over 2 decades. Now you serve
Which makes me sound old. Which kind of makes me sound old, but okay, fine. I'll take it.
Experience is the right term for it. So now you serve as security advisor at the office of CISO at Google. Mm-hmm. And you help shape the future of cloud security. So without further ado, would love to learn more about you. And maybe the best first question to kick this off is to really understand your perspective on security today. What do I need to know about your early days of your journey, and what context shaped where we're sitting today?
So the interesting bit is that we have... I am probably more known for my work in security operations. And if somebody encounters my writing from the years past, sort of assume I'm the SIEM guy or the logs guy. And, some people may remember me writing a book about PCI compliance many years ago. So occasionally that comes back to haunt me, sometimes in the form of jokes. But what I'm trying to get to is that people sort of assume my main focus is SIEM, SOAR, SOC, and SecOps. And that's not untrue. But I also, in the last 2-3 years, kind of in my late Gartner days, before Google, I worked for Gartner, and in my current Google days, I do deal a lot with securing AI, and I do deal with securing cloud. So it's almost like I feel like my day, I'm walking the 3 peaks of the triangle. I walk from the securing AI to back to SecOps for a bit. And then I realize customers are experiencing cloud for the first time in some cases. And even securing cloud is not an old topic for many. Sometimes when we see people in the middle of transformation, you want to assume they're doing AI, but some of them are in fact doing cloud. And sometimes the result is that the issue that for you and me may look like it's 2015, for customers, it's the now. So I feel like maybe that I am not just a SIEM, SOAR, EDR person, but I deal with other fun topics. And lately, it usually just means AI security. So yeah, there is that.
Yeah, AI security is a massive topic today. I feel like whichever room you're entering, it's inevitable not to mention this. But which part of the triangle do you think you're paying closer attention to today, and what are people requesting to talk about that you think is overlooked, or maybe not overlooked, but still worth the attention?
Admittedly, if I look at the just sheer hours that I spend on the topics, a lot of what I spend time on is securing AI. And as of a few months ago, it's also securing AI agents, frameworks for securing agents. Right now, I've been thinking a bit about defense in depth for agents. Google have published a recent paper on this topic, so we're kind of exploring how it applies to certain challenges that customers are facing. So to me, in terms of time spent, I would name AI security as my number one topic. But you asked about the overlooked topic, and for me, securing cloud and specifically secure use of cloud is the fun part. Many years ago, actually in 2015, 10 years ago, Gartner said that cloud is secure, but are you using it securely? And that question still haunts me, even though I was not the analyst who created it. It was Jay Heiser. So that question still haunts me. People say, yes, Anton, you convinced us. Google's cloud data centers and maybe other cloud providers' data centers, except for maybe one, are more secure than most customers' data centers. Fine, we believe you. But there's still breaches. There's still issues. What's going on? And typically the answer is, well, customers just aren't using the cloud securely. And that was the Gartner position, is that most cloud breaches are customers' fault. Now, exploring how to not make it be the case is the interesting challenge for me, because I don't want this to be in a blamey sort of mind frame. We think of shared fate and not shared responsibility here at Google, because we're trying to say that we as a provider can help with things on the customer side. So to avoid longer rant about this, I would say that AI security is the new hotness, but the cloud security is still very much an unresolved original hotness.
Very interesting. And I know that, the right approach is to share fate as you go along this journey, educating what is the right use. And what do you think sort of the bigger mistakes that the users are making that makes it less secure today?
So this is a really good one, and I've done a roundtable at RSA on this topic. It was kind of what does it mean to use cloud securely, and the thing that emerged from the roundtable is very interesting. I addressed the audience, and hello, you're here to talk about cloud security, secure use of cloud. What do you think is the best approach? Or what do you think is the approach we do? I don't think I asked the best approach. And somebody stood up and said, I just want all my data center controls to come with me to the cloud. And that's probably a bad answer. Like, I don't want to judge. It's an answer that I've seen many times, and it's a popular answer with some people. But it also, unfortunately, falls into the confusion that cloud is just somebody else's computer. It's absolutely not the case. Cloud is a different beast. Cloud involves computers owned by somebody else, but it's not a very good, useful metaphor to think about it that way. So that person clearly wanted to just copy everything he's been building since the 80s or 90s or whatever year, copy that to the cloud and say, I'm done. This is what secure use means. And I wanted to just shout and scream and say, no, don't do that. Cloud has a lot of advantages. Some of the controls you don't need. Some of the controls you do need, but they need to change. And some of the cloud native controls you got to apply. You can't just drag appliances with you to the cloud. But to me, the fact that people do that is a big mistake, is that they don't change the thinking. They change the environment. They change the tooling. They go to the cloud. But the thinking is still in a data center. Thinking is still, where's my screwdriver? I'm going to wreck the appliances. It's a little humorous, but it's also true that security thinking is on premise, but they operate in the cloud. And that to me is the source for many issues, whether it's the proverbial open buckets or overprivileged accounts or whatever else. It's just that they think oh, it's behind the firewall, or oh, I'll secure it on the endpoint. But they completely forget that it's in the cloud.
That's I think it's probably a human nature to have this copy-paste mindset. Even with the use of AI, so many of us just go about and say, hey, fix this for me fast, quick. And whenever a new tool comes in, it's not necessarily the right approach, and you might be doing a disadvantage to yourself by doing something like this. And you've really been across all the different spectrums, from coining the word EDR to moving to cloud. It's just you're moving more and more along the chain.
I'm not doing blockchain, by the way. I'm not. Very
I'll make
much
sure to
not
enunciate. It's not the blockchain.
Not.
But I'm curious because I think of a lot of the things that are happening today are also whatever was happening in the past. So I want to really understand a little more your past. What do you think was going on in security landscape back then that made you realize that we need this new category before we move to cloud? I just curious, what was your thinking behind it?
Sure, and this is my advantage at the time was that as I was thinking about things, I was also writing Gartner blogs and writing blogs at the time. So I can, even though Gartner deleted some of the older blogs, I still have copies, found out of archive.org. So I have some of my thinking at the time. I can still look at the blog and say, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking, which is kind of really helpful. And to me, it's a really strong testament for doing blogging as a way to kind of even remind yourself what you were thinking, because I don't know what I was thinking 10, 12 years ago. It's a little tough. But at the time, I was mostly still working in the area of detection and response, SOC, SIM, detections. And I was realizing at the time that simply assuming that I'm going to send all my logs into a SIM would just do the trick. And I've noticed enough companies that deploy deeper endpoint sensors, which clearly were not about logs and SIM, but they were also clearly not about antivirus and traditional endpoint security. And they were not native operating system logs. So I felt like there's something in there, and there's a bit of a cluster of vendors, technologies, some open source, some commercial, that grouped together to deliver deeper visibility of the endpoint. And as some analysts do, I realized, wait a second, if people build those tools, there's probably a need. And if the tools cluster, if there's enough of them in a slightly similar way, it's probably a market, or at least a technology category. So I started thinking about the name, and I've asked other analysts, I've done some internal polling, and I kind of thought, what I want to express is that it's a detection and response technology, DNR. It exists on an endpoint, and it's not about malware. So my original name was ETDR, and the T was originally there to remind people that it's about threats, not malware. There's no V or M in EDR. EDR is not antivirus. EDR was a detection and response technology focused on threats on the endpoint. Over time, some other colleagues at Gartner convinced me that T is unnecessary. It doesn't really do anything. It's a security technology. It clearly has a T. So forget the T. So it became EDR. Ultimately, EDR later merged with some types of antivirus. So modern EDR combine EDR and anti-malware and some other endpoint protection. But the original vision of EDR was observe, detect, investigate what happens on the endpoint, going beyond endpoint logs, and not just focused on malware. That's roughly, I think the second or third blog that I wrote about this is when it crystallized. If you're curious, it was on July 26, 2013. A matter of historical record. And I thought, okay, name it. And I put a blog out that says named, and I kind of like expressed the category name. And it, weirdly enough, it stuck. And not only it stuck, but it also produced a lot of later naming with something DR. I don't think I should take credit for everything DR. It's a bit, a bit pushing it. But I can see how EDR was the original something DR that then people started applying to other contexts. And soon thereafter, Gartner started thinking about NDR, and then this whole unfortunate accident that produced XDR was born. I really still hate it. Sorry. And then other places, like now we have, well, behind you on a poster, it says BDR, people ADR for application detection and response, and CDR didn't quite stick. Some vendors like cloud detection and response. I like it as a domain. I don't think we quite have the lively market space of CDR vendors. So to me, these are all kind of, okay, maybe I should not say copycats. They're kind of inspired by, at least to me, they're inspired by the original EDR name. Is that, hey, we have an EDR, but I want to have EDR, but for applications. How about the code ADR? So this to me has clear lineage. And I don't want to take too much credit for it, but it has clear lineage to EDR naming.
Definitely. And I think there is no reason not to deny it, because whatever we are doing out there, if you're in security space, not security space, people say you have to steal like an artist, right? And it's natural. It's natural for people to have certain expectations from the past and the way they shape the future, because so many times I did meet people and they were like, what do you do? And then if you just kind of replicate that EDR word and you explain, which is true, that was going on, it just creates this aha moment. That would be very hard to recreate without your help, without your fundamental work back then. So I have to officially thank you for, creating space and giving the language to translate to all the people out there. Because no matter, I know you can call it copycats.
But copycat is too harsh, but I think you're right. It's still in like an artist is the right one. Is that these are kind of derived or maybe born out of EDR DNA or something. Yeah, I think that's again. I don't want to be too presumptuous, but the lineage did start there.
Yeah. And so since your time at Gartner and now Google Cloud, what do you think? How have you seen customer expectations shift when it comes to detection and response?
Okay, so this is a really good one. Somewhere I have a more recent blog that talks about what DR, and it's like one word, what DR. And what I was trying to ponder there is I was trying to understand which domains, which pieces of IT or something justify having its own something DR. And where I'm going with this is that I promise I'm gonna actually answer a question. So, for example, once I was walking down RSA floor a few years ago, and I saw a vendor who claimed to have DDR for data detection and response. To me, that shouldn't exist, because first thing is, this vendor probably hated the stigma associated with DLP, but ultimately the technology that observes where business data moves and how it journeys through an enterprise and possibly leaks is called DLP. And it's not called DDR. And it is really no point making it. With some others, there is probably a good argument that it should exist. I don't have the crisp framework for beautifully answer it for every domain. Again, cloud is a good one. I don't know if we need CDR. There's one more that somebody gave birth to that I really hate is ITDR. ITDR is of course not DNR for IT. It's identity threat detection and response. They did insert a T, kind of like my original T. And I feel like maybe identity is not the right domain to have ITDR. But applications and maybe browser, I'm sure we'll get to that later, to me is a different universe where I probably don't rely on logs. I probably wouldn't rely on EDR. And so that means there's a bit of its own land. And for that land, maybe we do need its own DR. So, but to me, it's a bit of an unscientific question, but it's something that is worth a discussion for every domain. The challenge with ADR, by the way, is quite weird. I don't hate it. when you say A and I say A, you mean SAP, I mean the SaaS app somebody just wrote. It's just too different. If I have big enterprise application written in the 1980s, it probably need a DNR observation stack, and SAP, to pick an example, does have essentially what used to be called IDS for SAP, but now it's maybe EDR for SAP or ADR. But the cloud apps have a very different ADR. So to me, maybe we don't need one ADR, maybe we need more than one ADR. But that makes it tricky. Ultimately, Windows EDR and Linux EDR is still EDR. But for applications, the difference is too huge. And that makes it tricky. I didn't really answer a question specifically, but I feel like it's a useful journey down the land, down several lands where something DR should exist. But another criteria I would use, if to detect and investigate in a certain domain, I just use logs and nothing else, you shouldn't coin as something DR. You just load the logs into a SIEM, run the analysis, get the detections, investigate what happened. If you rely on logs, you don't need something DR or some new DR.
I understand your thought process. It's more about it's more about universe that you're in, and to what extent people can get confused. Like, what is it? What does it do? And
yes, people can get confused. There's absolutely no debate, and that's why some of the something DRs would stick, and we would be using them in 5 years, and some others may well not stick. They may well be something that people kind of make jokes about and then not remember what it is. So I think that the time will tell is my actual take. I think that we've been coining acronyms for quite some time. And security, of course, my former colleagues at Gartner love coining acronyms, and some of them stick and some of them don't. And some of them stick for a while and then they die. For example, today, if you ask about cloud security, you're much more likely to know what's CNAPP versus what CWPP. CWPP just gives people this 2010s vibe.
Fair point. I think this is probably gonna be the question of time. Whatever we see stick more is probably gonna tell us, hey, this is the domain where people need the DR. So it would be interesting to see the evolution of this whole journey. And
Yes.
you've written so extensively about security analytics. With the current AI boom, how are AI and ML changing the game of threat detection? I know that I brought another part of the triangle to the different part, but would be interesting to hear.
So I would say that it's if you would have asked me this question, say, a year and a half ago, I would say that I am very much a long-term AI optimist and a short-term AI skeptic, which means that people who naively say, oh yeah, lots of data, oh, I have AI, let's combine them together, boom, magic happens. A lot of those people would leave disappointed because sometimes magic does happen. We've had really epic use cases with giving the malware binaries to Gemini, and Gemini tells you what they do, and sometimes even who wrote them. And it's quite magical. But at the same time, with certain type of other data, like logs from applications, I don't think AI would tell you what they mean, because nobody knows what they mean. Humans don't know. and well, frankly, nobody knows. And moreover, sometimes they mean nothing. And analyzing them is absolutely pointless. So I feel like I'm shifting from the short-term skeptic, long-term optimist to a careful short-term optimist as well as long-term optimist, because I'm seeing more use cases. So this year's RSA, another example, we're recording this in May, right? So RSA was in May. I've went through the floor looking for impactful AI for security use cases. And I've seen a lot of AI for security usage, but I haven't seen a lot of crisp outcomes where it's like, we did this with AI and you now spend half the time or double the effectiveness or half the cost for this security task. I was looking for it, and I haven't seen enough of that, or I have seen very little of it, frankly. So I remain an optimist, and I see examples, but I want this robust proof of value. And I'm not really seeing it in bulk. I'm seeing little tidbits here and there.
I think this is just my thinking behind it is as soon as the whole AI adoption started going so rapidly, a lot of the vendors out there, they thought, okay, how do I address this risk? Which doesn't necessarily fundamentally means changing the whole model, but sort of a bit of an integration, which I think in a way answers your question. Why is there no standalone, strong solution that is just like AI? But what do you think is missing when it comes to, like, what were you searching for when you were walking around that RSA floor?
I was searching for for a vendor to tell me, we have technology that did X. Now this technology has AI and it does X, but 2 times better, or 2 times cheaper, or 2 times less skill requirement. And they all say that that's the idea, that's the intent. But if you say, okay, show me how in my SOC it would save my analyst time, or it would remove the need for analysts, I've seen a lot more vague statements. For example, Google published a study from the internal teams, not the product side, about how certain application of Gen AI in a certain security process has resulted in 53% savings, time savings. So it can be done. And I wish people would do that, because ultimately this was done by a team that doesn't sell anything. It's done by a team that's responsible for a certain aspect of securing Google. But they do have this number that says 53% of time was saved. So vendors, please do that, because ultimately it becomes very buzzwordy and very hard to be convinced that this tech should actually be deployed. I get the directional statements, but I want a more clear value statement. This saves time through this mechanism, and the typical results are X and Y. Kind of like a little bit like gas mileage. Now this car is a hybrid, it has half the gas mileage. Okay, now this DLP has AI, it has half of blah and double the whatever. Like, but give me that. I need that. I don't want the vague positive statements.
I'm actually just taking notes as you're speaking. I was like, good idea. What needs to be there? What needs to be included? And I think you're right from the way that, hey, it would make a lot more conversations more tangible, because a lot of solutions is storytelling, and this is inevitable, right? You have to. That's why we use your term EDR to explain whatever is going on today. But if there was more measurable impact, that definitely would be useful. But what also a lot of people do today, if we shift from using AI to make a stronger case, a lot of people focus on securing AI. And I think this is a big topic where they say, hey, I don't want, I know that a few companies, they're like, oh, I don't want ChatGPT in at my enterprise at all, because this possesses such a big risk. As you were speaking to more and more people out there, what do you think is the general sentiment? Are they long-term optimists and then short-term skeptics?
So, well, the first thing is my experience with say around RSA led me to believe that more people are trying to apply AI for security than people are securing AI. I think there's both going on for sure. And I probably deal more with securing AI than applying AI for security. I was just on a quest to find examples. I think that the shadow AI or AI used by employees is a fact. It's I don't care who you are. If you say that I don't want ChatGPT in my enterprise, you're going to have ChatGPT in your enterprise. And moreover, there's a humorous story that's kind of inspired by a real story, but let's just say enough of this is made up. So because I can share it, is there's a company that said that blocked ChatGPT on the firewall and emailed every employee that you are not allowed to use ChatGPT. And the 5 remaining people who'd never heard of ChatGPT thought, oh, ChatGPT, we should really look it up. And ultimately, the usage of the out of policy AI has increased at that company, not decreased, because everybody whips out a phone, uses their own connection, and just uses the same what they've done, right? Models are now multimodal, so you can do pictures and video. I was just a few moments before this recording, I was arguing with Gemini about the interpretation of some Gartner versus IDC analyst data. And it was kind of like, I show a picture to Gemini and say, see, this chart says this. And Gemini is like, no, I think it also counts this other stuff. So the point is that it's just so easy these days that you would almost not realize whether you're using it for work, on a work system, for work on a personal system. So to me, ban is not the answer. And ban is, unless, of course, you want to, increase the out of rules usage.
Yeah, definitely. Because whenever you tell someone not to do it, they're definitely gonna go and do it. And I think maybe we need MDR just for mobile usage as well, so that you have this full visibility, because you can't control it. People would switch to mobile in case you stop it completely.
So this is actually fascinating, and it almost is going to send me down on a very dangerous tangent. Nobody ever thought about MDR. And I am almost curious as to what is different about it. Like I have my hypothesis, but there's no, I don't think there's MDR for managed detection and response. So the acronym MDR exists, but there's no mobile detection and response. And this is really interesting that for the Android and iOS, this type of technology was never born. It was never born, probably won't be born. And it's just done differently and elsewhere. And it's not done through deploying, I guess there's mobile EDR a little bit. Like in the early days, some people tried to do EDR for mobile, but I think that was very short-lived and died quite quickly.
Yeah. I think it potentially, because it's such a big intersection of personal and corporate life, that it's just impossible to divide. I mean, if we speak about browser, this is already the place where you have your personal task and your corporate tasks. And it's very hard to just say, hey, you can't do your personal things, because this is such a fine line. And similar to mobile usage, right? How do you say, don't message your wife? But still perform your tasks. So it's maybe going a little bit, on the edge with the privacy. And that's something that could have been stopping. I don't know.
I mean, that's one possibility, yes, but also that it also is possible that the mobile platforms were born with a lot more security compared to like Windows and even Linux. So it is possible that the evolution went in a different direction. I've not met, again, I'm remembering that in the days of early EDR, some customers did ask us about, hey, do you have EDR for Mac? Do you have EDR for Linux? Do you have EDR for Windows? Do you have EDR for mobile? But it was like such a tiny niche that I almost like forgot that it existed, or people asked. Ultimately, that was never born because mobile platforms evolved differently. And of course, some mobile device makers probably would just say, what? You want an agent on our machine? Get lost. No. I mean, I'm thinking of Apple, but also that's just not an approach they would allow. And I think to me, this is a interesting difference, that the mobile EDR is not a thing.
Yeah, I think have to admit that Apple, Samsung, everyone, Android, everyone did such an incredible job when it comes to creating such a model where it's mostly secure. I think we have to touch upon the topic, as more business related activities happen, like shifting from endpoint to the browser. How do you think security needs to adapt as more and more activities are happening on the browser?
So this is a really good one. I think it's a fun question to discuss. I definitely meet enough people who think of a browser as kind of an OS. And of course, I work for the home of Chrome, so I should have an opinion about this. I just haven't dealt with this all that much. But in the industry, I do see people who think that they because many of the employees live inside the browser, you should grow a similar ecosystem to security tools inside the browser. Of course, we have the extension risks. We have all sorts of code running in browsers. We have all sorts of, now we have, ML models in the browser. I think that we obviously, Google announced, I think Google did announce Gemini for Chrome. So there is a idea that there would be AI in the browser. So it means that there is a universe of things living inside the browser. And when I see that as a security person, I think, what's going on in that universe? I want to observe what the story is. And it may mean enterprise browser. It may mean application use. It may mean some local activities. So it's a kind of and of course, there's classic consumer use. So at least for the enterprise browser use, I certainly see the need of something that gives me deeper visibility about what happens inside my browser. Yes, it's hardened a little bit, like, again, the mobile platform we discussed, but there's a lot going on, and that if I see a lot going on anywhere, I think, I probably need some kind of observation technology for doing DNR.
Yeah. And I think this is another argument for, DR technologies. It's like, does it provide any additional visibility capability that we're missing? Are you just replicating? Are you just using the cool word? Or does it actually give the visibility that you weren't able to see before? Browse extensions is a great example. Like, right now, enterprises can't track browse extensions without... I don't know, a lot of them like to blanket block some, but there are so many granularities that are involved in this process that, hopefully we see evolution and faster adoption of, at least for visibility case. But
I think it's for enterprise browsing mostly, because a few years ago I was at RSA as well. And I was going around some enterprise browser vendors asking them, why do you guys exist? We already have a browser. Why do you need one more browser with an enterprise label? And then weirdly enough, I had this epiphany that enterprise browser isn't the browser. It's kind of an application delivery system to an employee to do the work. So once I flipped that switch in the brain, I stopped thinking, enterprise browser, that's stupid. Because you have a browser, that's it. But after that shift, I started thinking, enterprise browser, that actually makes sense. You do want a business optimized tool for application delivery and doing the work. And of course, I live in Chrome most of the time. So Chrome for me is the enterprise browser, well, here at Google. But I think the point that there is a need to observe activities is very real, because there are a lot of activities.
Yeah, there are there are a lot of activities, and it's great. It's great to slowly see that mindset shift, because, as you said, a lot of people think like, hey, there is already a browser that I'm using. Why do I need something that is extra there, something that that I'm not used to? And having the visibility is, I think, the turning point, saying like, hey, this is not enough. And this is why, as you mentioned before, the metrics, it's all about the metrics, right? Can you tell me the metrics of what I was missing and what can you see now? And I know I went on a rant about it. But
No. It's actually very useful, because to me that the perception, though, is that the evolution could have gone the way of the mobile platforms, where you restrict everything and you don't need a mobile EDR and additional telemetry. But the evolution went more towards the open ecosystem, right? Where in the browser, you can run all sorts of code. And then, wait a second, someone needs to observe what this code is. But this is a very fun discussion about what kind of universe exists inside the browser versus inside the mobile OS. So again, not my area, but it's a fun discussion nonetheless.
Yeah. And I'm sure that in your career, you must have seen some fascinating breaches, stories, incidents. Without naming the names, what is the craziest one you remember?
So I really can't beat my Mandiant colleagues with breach stories. And of course, we work for the same company now. So I get to listen to their horrible things about breaches. But one thing that is stuck in my head for the last 2 years is that some of them told me that almost no matter what you do, you are breached because of Active Directory. And I thought, wait a second, what if I use cloud? Active Directory is why you're breached. What about if you use Google Cloud? Active Directory is why you're breached. I thought, no, you guys are too harsh. It can't possibly be that bad. And they kind of looked down and didn't say anything. So my impression is that this is kind of a weird, twisted truth about the breaches today, is that the Active Directory plays a central role in them if my Mandiant colleagues are to be believed. I think I would leave it at that. I tend to not hang out too much with OT security people because otherwise I lose sleep. So if I talk to ICS or SCADA security people and they tell me about breaches, I'm not going to sleep for weeks, and I tend to just not do it.
I had the privilege of speaking to one of the CISOs out there, and she brought up a good point, saying, hey, there are so many breaches. I'm so overwhelmed. But if you can pinpoint what is vulnerability in my environment, then I will listen. And, I think there are a lot of breach stories and people out there just thinking, how applicable is it to my space? My environment? Am I fragile, or am I strong enough to beat this? So always interesting to see that.
That's a useful reminder why vulnerability scanning is such an interesting business, where people discover vulnerabilities in your environment, but then people struggle, don't fix them, and say, well, give me the real risk. And I mean, all the vendors in the space are trying to present some form of quote unquote real risk so that you can rank it by what matters to you and not based on just like CVSS score or high, medium, low, or whatever. So again, I've covered this at Gartner, and I remember having this endless Groundhog Day where people scan, people don't patch, people argue about vulns, and the change is very slow and admittedly very painful. So this is kind of a fun one. Well, fun in a bad way.
Yeah. And right now, you sat on advisory boards of startups and work inside giants like Alphabet. What's you think is the common mistake security startups make today when they try to sell to enterprises?
Oh, yeah, that is a really good one. And I think that I have a really crisp answer. And the crisp answer is that the challenge they have is that they usually miss two things. How much of the old tech and old process is there, and how much enterprise complexity affects things. These are usually interconnected. It's almost like they don't consider the fact that a certain process at a certain bank involves a human calling a human, and then that human looking up something on a mainframe. It's a made-up example, but it illustrates both complexity of some processes. And they say, oh yeah, we're going to secure blah and blah. But there's certain step in the blah is humans calling other humans, and the digital systems would have trouble securing that interaction because it may happen over the phone or in a ticket or in a freaking piece of paper passed to somebody. Okay, now I'm pushing it too far. And the fact that a lot of legacy tech is still very real. So to me, the legacy process, legacy tech, and enterprise complexity form a very nasty mud ball, or like a nasty combination that is really hard to solve from the outside. You may build a really good tech that helps with in a SOC using AI, or detect threats in X or fixes Y, and you show up and you realize it's a company that existed for 300 years and their IT was started in 1957 and they still have Windows 2003 deployed, and you're like, holy cow, how I'm going to actually make my tech fit? Underestimating this is the main challenge. If you want to sell only to the absolute cutting edge 2-year-old startups in Bay Area, go right ahead. You would not have to deal with legacy tech and probably legacy process. But most of the world isn't like that. And to an extent to which it is not like that is the mistake, is that they kind of forget that you show up with your container sec and I say, can your container sec technology works on a mainframe? Again, that's an absurd question. I'm making this up and not quite well. But the point is that sometimes you realize that enterprise tech stack is a layered cake from the 70s to 2020s. And you have to live with that. And otherwise, you may solve easy 20% of the problem and leave the hard 80% to a customer. And they get mad if you do that, and they buy from somebody else.
So then in this case, do you advise startups, hey, think like if you want your solution to be universal, then you should be able to go deep down in the waters, whatever is going on in the customer's environment, and be able to integrate across all the processes. Did I correct?
Or you segment and deal with people who don't have that layered cake of tech, but it would limit you would only sell to modern environments, and or you have to help them modernize maybe. And so your choices would be either to learn how it really works and fit with that, or you would only sell and your technology would only offer value to companies who are much newer and don't have the layered cake of tech going back to the 70s. But to me, this is the kind of the fun part and the tricky part, is that rat hole does go deep. And if you choose to not go deep, then you would probably deal with a very specific segment of companies or very specific segment of problems, and you'd be one of the 70 security vendors they buy from.
Mm-hmm. So you have to pick your own battle in this case.
You have to pick your battles, or you have to do more, or pick your battles very carefully, or go and deal with complexities that you may not be prepared to deal with.
Yeah. What technology today excites you most about where we headed next?
It's a kind of a cheap question, right? Because I'm going to use AI, right? I feel like I've noticed a few weeks ago that Gemini isn't helpful for me anymore, but it's indispensable. Like I've caught this moment when I stopped thinking that Gemini is helpful in my work. I started thinking that it's indispensable. And that to me was a really interesting moment when I'm like, I was trying to do something on a plane without internet, and I pushed the button thinking I'm going to test this idea with Gemini, and Gemini wasn't there. And I'm like,
please come back.
Please come back. Yes. And at that moment, I'm like, that has shifted from helpful to indispensable. Yeah. And I'm one random example. Plural of anecdote is not data. I get all that. But it is interesting how quickly it's happening. And I think to me, this is a surprise. And I still see the AGI by 2027 crowd of crazy people. And but to me, people who think that AI doesn't help them are just as crazy.
Yeah. It's I have to admit, I'm still proud of myself for graduating during the time when this technology wasn't out there. I was so strong, and right now it's, I can't think of a single day when you don't want to just go and use it. It's just impossible. I think today is just impossible. And if you are not using it, then your competition does. So
correct. That's exactly right.
So have to. So we have this still tradition in our podcast, Anton, where typically our previous guest would ask question to the next guest. So our previous guest asked, if you could go back 20 years, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Okay, so 20 years younger self. It's a random weird thing, and it's very specific to me. Throughout my entire security career, I always stayed away from AppSec, application security. And it's not a point of pride. It just happened that I just do SecOps and threat intel and DLP and PCI compliance and denial of service even, but not AppSec. And today, when I look at some of the application-focused detection and response problems, I feel like I should have invested a small part of my time in learning AppSec. Sure, yeah. I can explain the SQL injection to a third grader, fine. I know it to that extent, but I don't know AppSec. And I wish I knew a little bit more AppSec to be more useful in my DNR and AI security job. Because frankly, a lot of security and AI today is the 2000s AppSec. If you focus on prompt injection too much, SQL injection gets you. So that's why AppSec is handy. And that's, for me, it would have been useful to know more about AppSec. And now, you're telling me I need to make a question, right?
Yes. Question for our next guest.
Okay. So the question for the next guest would be this. What advice would you give more junior security people about how to prepare for the world where AI does even more of the work?
That's a very good question. I think there was an article recently about it, right? Saying like how many jobs out there getting replaced with AI. And
there was an article in Economist last week that none have been replaced. So it's for now it's TBD. I think that the jury is still out on this one.
I'm curious. I'm curious to see, because I'm one of these people, right? When you're just thinking about security, you're like, okay, what distinguishes me versus this technology that is so smart? And I will be very curious to hear what our next guest has to say. Well, Anton, it's been really, really fun having you here with us. It's been such a great conversation. I think now I have better understanding of where the place where you started, how it led you where you are today. And I'm sorry if I use this sort of chain analogies. You went, from EDR to cloud, but it is true. I think in today's world, you have to be so agile. No matter where you started, don't let you hold you there, and just see what people need out there and be able to adapt. So
absolutely.
It's been a lot of fun, Anton. Thank you so much.
Same here. Thanks for inviting me. Well, take care.